The woman sitting across from me didn't have any skin on her chin, just raw gray muscle exposed to the air of the cabin. I saw it clearly in the dim, flickering yellow light of the overhead bulb before my brain could register the horror and force me to look away. I blinked, and for a split second, she looked like a normal woman in a floral dress, but when I focused again, the ragged edge of her jawline was visible. I sat back, my spine hitting the cracked vinyl of the seat. I tried to tell myself it was just the lighting, or maybe some kind of gruesome medical condition, but there was no way anyone could survive with their lower face literally missing. I looked out the window instead. The bus was winding through the mountain passes between Baguio and Pangasinan. It was late, well past midnight. Usually these trips are filled with the sounds of snoring tourists or people scrolling on their phones, but this bus was silent. Not a single person moved. They all sat perfectly upright, their hands folded in their laps like statues. I looked around again because I couldn't help it. There were about 12 other passengers. They were all pale, not just fair-skinned, but porcelain white, like they hadn't seen the sun in years. They didn't have any bags at their feet, no backpacks, no plastic bags of snacks, nothing. They just sat there, staring straight ahead into the darkness of the road. The driver was a man with a hunched back and a cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't turn his head when I shifted in my seat. He just gripped the steering wheel with knuckles that looked like white stones. Every few miles, he would shift gears, and the only sound was the mechanical grind of the transmission and the heavy thrum of the engine against the mountain road. I tried to speak to the woman across from me. I just wanted to hear a human voice to break the suffocating silence. "Excuse me," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Is this seat taken?" She didn't move. She didn't blink. Her eyes were fixed on something in front of her face that wasn't there. It was like she was frozen in a photograph. I felt a cold prickle crawl up my neck. My heart began to pound. I looked at the ticket in my hand. I had taken this bus because it was the last one leaving the Highland terminal. I was tired, exhausted from the long trek, and I just wanted to get home to Pangasinan. The ticket was old, the paper feeling like heavy parchment rather than standard thermal paper. It bore a strange symbol at the bottom, a stylized gate. The bus suddenly slowed down. We weren't at a stop. There were no signs of a terminal or a rest area. The driver pulled over to a crossroads where the asphalt gave way to gravel and thick, choking weeds. A heavy mist rolled in from the trees, swallowing the headlights until they only illuminated a few feet ahead. The doors creaked open. The sound was like a groan of metal on bone. I watched as 3 figures walked toward the bus from the fog. They moved with a strange, synchronized gait, their limbs stiff. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, a man in a traditional shirt, a woman in a tattered traditional gown, and a child who seemed to be drifting slightly off the ground. They climbed onto the bus. They didn't take seats. They simply stood in the aisle or sat near the back, their heads bowed. The air in the cabin suddenly turned heavy, smelling of wet earth and something sweet like rotting lilies left in a vase for too long. I tried to shrink into my seat. I didn't want to be noticed by them. I didn't want to be part of whatever this was. The driver glanced at me for the first time in an hour. His eyes were milky, as if cataracts had clouded his vision completely. He didn't look at my face. He looked at my chest. "You have a long way to go," he rasped. "The destination is nearly reached." I didn't know what that meant. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The bus took off again, moving faster now. The engine roared as we descended toward the lowlands. But as the miles ticked by, I started to notice things about the other passengers. The woman with the missing chin wasn't moving her lips, but a faint sound was coming from her, a wet, gargling noise like air escaping through a punctured lung. I looked at the man in the traditional shirt who had just joined us. His skin was gray, and there were dark, bruised circles around his eyes that looked like they were bruising from the inside out. He wasn't breathing. I watched his chest. It didn't rise or fall. None of them were breathing. I felt a surge of panic. This wasn't a regular liner. This was something else entirely. My mind raced back to the stories I'd heard about the mountains, the rumors of the corpse buses that traveled through the passes in the dead of night, taking those who had passed away from the mountain clinics and bringing them home to their families. It was a superstition. a tall tale told by old drivers to keep people from wandering into the woods at night. But I wasn't a storyteller today. I was an observer of reality, and the reality in front of me was terrifying. I looked down at my ticket again. The name printed on it was mine, but the date underneath was different. It didn't show the current year. It showed a date from 3 days ago, the day of my uncle's funeral. A chill ran through me. My uncle had died in an accident near the mountain passes. He was from Pangasinan. He was being transported, but I wasn't supposed to be on this bus. I was home, or so I thought. How did I underappear? The realization hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't boarded this bus by accident. Something had pulled me onto it. I looked at the driver again. He turned his head slightly toward me. "You are late for your journey," he said. "Your kin has already claimed your seat." The words were a death sentence. I realized that if I stayed on this bus until the final stop in Pangasinan, I wouldn't be getting off to go home. I would be joining them. I would be part of the cargo. The claim meant that someone, perhaps my uncle's spirit or something else masquerading as him, had marked me as a soul ready for transition. I had to get off. Now. The bus began to slow down again. We were approaching another crossroads, this one deeper in the valley where the trees grew so thick they blocked out the stars. The fog was so dense it felt like wool against my skin. This was it. I couldn't wait for the final stop. I stood up, my legs shaking like reeds in a storm. The movement caused a few of the passengers to turn their heads toward me. They didn't have faces in the way we do. Their features were blurred, as if they were melting into the skin. "Excuse me," I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. "I need to get off. This isn't my stop." The bus groaned to a halt. The driver didn't look at me, but his hands gripped the wheels so hard the leather began to crack. He spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding stones. "You cannot leave your seat. It is reserved." I ignored him. I grabbed the handle of the door and pushed it open. The air that rushed in was freezing, smelling of damp soil and old wood. I stepped out onto the gravel, my feet hitting the ground with a thud that felt like it echoed through the entire valley. I didn't look back. I ran. I ran into the fog, my breath coming in harsh gasps. Behind me, I heard the heavy thrum of the engine and the screech of brakes. It sounded like something massive was mourning. I could hear voices, not human voices, but a chorus of whispers that seemed to come from the ground itself, chanting in a language that felt old and jagged. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they were being pulled apart by weights. Every time I turned my head, I saw a flicker of light through the fog, the bus's headlights, following me. It wasn't just staying behind. It was hunting. The ground beneath me became uneven, and I tripped over a protruding root. I tumbled forward, rolling into a ditch filled with tall, dry grass. I lay there for a moment, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack a bone. The woods became silent. No engine. No whispers. I stayed still for what felt like an hour, listening to the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. When I finally gathered the courage to look up, I saw the fog beginning to lift just enough to reveal the silhouettes of trees above me. I crawled out of the ditch and began to walk toward a faint light in the distance. It wasn't the bus. It was the glow of a small roadside shrine, nestled under a massive large tree. At its base sat a small kerosene lamp, miraculously still burning. I reached the shrine and collapsed against the stone base. I stayed there for hours, huddled in the dirt, until the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the mist. When the sun finally rose over the mountains, it wasn't the same world I had left behind. The air was still heavy with that smell of rot and lilies, but the sounds of the night were gone. A few miles down the road, I heard the distant sound of a motorbike, a real vehicle, driven by a man who looked exhausted and confused. I eventually made my way to the road and flagged him down. He was a local farmer, his face etched with lines from years of sun exposure. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, looking at my torn clothes and the sheer terror in my eyes. What happened? I couldn't tell him about the bus. I couldn't tell him about the woman with no skin or the man in the traditional shirt who wasn't breathing. I just looked back toward the mountains. "The road is long," I managed to say. "I think I missed my stop." He nodded slowly, his expression turning grim. "The roads up there, they don't always give back what they take. Sometimes people go up for a ride and they just don't come back down. They get caught in the fog of the wrong route. I looked at my hands. They were shaking uncontrollably. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ticket. It was gone. In its place was a small, withered piece of gray skin the size of a coin with a single word etched into it by something sharp. Stay. The farmer saw the scrap and his face went pale. He didn't say anything, but he didn't look at me again for the rest of the ride to the nearest village. I am safe now, in a small room in a town 3 hours away from where I fell out of that bus. But every time I close my eyes, I see the woman across from me. I hear the sound of her lungs trying to find air, and sometimes, when the wind blows from the north, I can still smell those lilies. But the worst part isn't the memory of the bus or the fear of what I saw in the dark. It's the fact that even though I am here and the sun is rising over my bed every morning, I feel like a piece of me stayed behind on that road. My shadow doesn't seem to move quite as fast as I do anymore. Sometimes, when I pass a mirror, it takes a second too long for my reflection to catch up to my movements. I keep thinking about what the driver said. You are late for your journey. I think I escaped the bus, but I don't think I escaped the ticket. I can still feel that faint, lingering pull in the back of my mind like a hook caught in my spirit, dragging me toward those mountains, toward that white fog, and toward the seat that was reserved for someone who is no longer among the living. Sometimes, when it's very quiet at night, I hear a low, rhythmic thrumming sound coming from the walls of my room, a deep, mechanical groan like an engine idling in the distance. And then, just before I fall asleep, I hear the faint, metallic screech of brakes and the heavy creak of a door opening, as if something is waiting for me to finally accept my seat. I look at my hand in the dark, wondering why it feels so cold, and I find myself wondering, if the bus didn't let me off, did I actually get out, or am I just waiting for the next time they come to collect what was left behind?